Thank you very much. Quite wonderful to be back. These lawns of my childhood. Anyway, I'm glad to be speaking after Shopunda, who actually I'm very fond of. But the good thing with going after after Shopunda is that he ad-libs so much that it is so easy to just, pick up like so. So when Dada says three things, he says, in this city in 1894, actually no, Dada, Chandranath Bosu wrote it not in 1894, it was 1892. Then he says, my non-vegetarian something. I love it. It is actually our Hinduism, Shopunda, that allows you to eat that chicken patty here and not say anything about it, because if it was your Hindutva, 1 kilometer away in the Calcutta Maidan, just for eating that chicken patty, your brothers might have beaten you to pulp. Right? You tell us about that half-educated Babu who ate beef. And I remember reading quite a few columns about your beef-eating history in Oxford. But be that as it may, let me get to the point. So let us start. I think it's actually quite wonderful that we are having this debate in Calcutta. Even with all the Ghuspetias in the audience, I think it is one of the few cities in which we can have this debate today. Because both Hinduism and the word Hindutva can be traced back to two Bengali gentlemen at either end of the long 19th century. One is Dr. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, to whom, as an English word, Hinduism is traced back to in 1816. And he took it to mean a fairly capacious term for the diverse spiritual traditions deriving from the Vedantic corpus. But then we go on to Chandranath Bosu. And Chandranath Bosu invented, I say the word invented, coined Hindutva in 1892. He's also, like Savarkar, has a very interesting history, and not a lot of people know about it, because when my colleague, Mr. Manishankar Iyer, was talking about 1923, yes, Savarkar wrote his book in 1923, but way before that, 30 years before that, in 1892 was when the term Hindutva was coined in this city. And Chandranath was a native of Hooghly. It's a place from which Shopunda likes to fight elections and often lose them. But he was a native of Hooghly, and he graduated from Presidency College. And equally proficient in English and Bangla, served as a deputy magistrate in Dhaka, and then was an official translator to the Bengal government for over 30 years. He originally wrote in English, and then he wrote a review in Bengali of Krishnakanter Will, which caught Rishi Bonkim's eye, and Bonkim Da, I'm sure our Prime Minister wouldn't mind me referring to him since he set the tone like the same way. So when Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay read the review, he encouraged him to say, why don't you write in Bengali? So he starts writing in Bongo Darshan, which, by the way, is the same literary magazine in which the first two stanzas of Bande Mataram were first published in 1875. So Chandranath, while his time in presidency, used to frequent Brahmo discussions and was quite sort of liberal. But then he meets this very orthodox Brahmin Pundit called Shashodhar Tarkachuramuni in Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's house. And he returns to religious scriptures with a passion. And he starts advocating a very rigid sort of return to religious scriptures. He writes something called Poshupati Shangbad, then writes something called Shakuntala Tattva. And again, there in Shakuntala Tattva, he very interestingly compares Kalidas's Shakuntala to Shakespeare's Juliet, and he highlights the victory of self-restraint and penance, which he calls Dharma, over the uncontrolled and unbridled love, which he calls Adharma. So Omiya Prasad Sen, the prominent historian who just passed away, he said that Chandranath's work was a thoughtless application of hardcore orthodoxy, where he was trying to find conservative values where none existed. Anyway, in 1892, Chandranath produces his magnum opus, which is called Hindutva, Hindur Prokrito Itihash. And that is where the term Hindutva first comes in. And this envelops a sort of variety of traditional and often very contradictory beliefs. Chandranath goes on to portray Hindus as fundamentally superior to people of all other faiths, says Hindu traditions are superior to Western culture, says India shall not be a homeland for foreign religions like Islam and Christianity. He says Tantra is an integral part of Hinduism. It represents an inherent Hindu manliness and vigor. And he then writes 2 pamphlets, and for all the women in the audience, you'll quite enjoy it. I mean, it's quite peachy. In these pamphlets, Chandranath says, the superiority of the Hindu woman is in her dedication to cooking in the kitchen for long hours because she can take the heat and smoke. He then writes Savitri Tattva. He says Savitri is the ideal Hindu wife. And then besides this, the other interesting things he did, again, I'm speaking here on the second oldest club led by, for the first time, a lady. He supported child marriage. He says this led to the development of the ideal housewife. He prized female chastity as a social gift, mind you. He opposed reforms in female education. He opposed widow remarriage. He dissented against the 1891 Consensual Age of Consent Act, which raised the age of sexual intercourse consent for women from 10 to 12, which said that, it would be rape if it was more than under the age of between 10 and 12. He says, no, the age of 10 is absolutely okay. So this is his concept of Hindutva. This is the man who gave us Hindutva. And this is what you're proud of. But Chandranath, for all his faults, his Hindutva was confined to a religious, a scriptural, and a literary framework. Then what happens? Then comes along 1923. Who do we have? We have Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. He is the one who gives Hindutva the core political spin. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have all the Ghuspaitias in the audience, because Chandranath's Hindutva was actually quite boring, It was Savarkar who tied this Hindutva to a theory of monolithic Indian nationalism, this territorial, racial, cultural, political nationalism that had no room for Islam, it had no room for Christianity, no other form of consciousness that couldn't be traced back to a Hindu core. Now, it's also important to note here that the very word Hindu is not in the Vedas. It's not in the Upanishads. It's not in any Vedantic Upanishadic corpus. It's not in the epics. It's not in the Dharma Shastras. It's not in any major Sanskrit or Prakrit literary text. It is not even in the majority of the Puranas. Savarkar relied on a fake Purana. And the reason I call it a fake Purana was because it is called the Bhavishya Purana. And the reason I call it a fake Purana was in this Purana you have reference to Sunday, Monday, Tuesday as days of the week and reference to Queen Victoria. Now, Queen Victoria's timeline was 1819 to 1901. So if any Purana which made a reference to this had to be a fake Puran. And then Savarkar, what he says is, he says militarized Hinduism and Hinduized militarism. When after Savarkar pleads with the British, gets a get out of jail free card, remember he goes out and he boycotts the Quit India movement. When Gandhiji calls for the Quit India movement in 1942, Savarkar's boycotting it. He's head of the Hindu Mahasabha. He boycotts it and he is asking members of the Hindu Mahasabha, please get into the British army. And he uses the term Hinduized militarism and militarized Hinduism. This is his idea of Hindutva. It is political, racial, cultural. It has nothing to do with either religion or spirituality, which is what Hinduism as we know it is. And when you talk of, Shapunda again was referring to this, Savarkar actually wrote, he said, he hated Muslims, but he said that the one good thing about Muslims is when you're talking about Muslims in the medieval age, they went around raping all these Hindu women and giving birth to more and more Muslims. And Hindus should actually take a leaf out of that book, because this suicidal Hindu idea of chivalry, of treating enemy women with respect, was going to do no good for the predominance of the Hindu race. Now, as Hindus, we can accept the diversity of practices under rubric Hinduism as a modern concept, and we can argue about how liberal it is, how open it is. On one side, you can have the spirituality of Ramakrishna Dev, which is highly accommodative. You have Belur Mott that has Jishu Pujo, which has Jishu Utsav, where you have a aroti done with cake and flowers, and, that's on one side. Where he regarded even Jesus as a form of divinity, which was absolutely okay with Ramakrishna. He saw no conflict in that. And, but even the RSS, I would say, they do not confuse Hindutva with a religion. Hindutva is a political expression that seeks to consolidate Hindus in an exclusionary platform that is adversarial. That is the soul. If there is one word that is the divide between Hinduism on one side and Hindutva on the other, it was adversarial. Hindutva believes that as a political platform, mine is the only way, and Hinduism believes as a religion and a spiritual platform that there is room for a lot of others along the way. So for instance, while there's some Hindu practices, 1 minute, where Hindu practices and Hinduism can imagine love between Hindus and Muslims, a Hindutva practitioner will say, no, this is love jihad. So a Bengali Hindu eating meat will offer meat to Ma Kali, but a practitioner of Hindutva will say that's not on. So a Hindu doesn't need to bother about the fact that there are lots of things that we do, including imagining Ma Kali in a form and referring to Krishna as the love of my life. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not blasphemy. But for a Hindutva, that is blasphemy. So the core question here is, does Hinduism need to protect itself from Hindutva? I would say that the best way to continue to protect Hinduism is to continue to realize that Hindutva is there because Hindutva was there, because Hinduism was there. Hindu ache bole Hindutva holo. It is not the other way around. So in a way, when Hinduism is religious, it is spiritual, and the only need of the hour is to free it from this Hindutva sort of brand of rabid, noxious political nationalism that has overtaken it. And
we've got to wind up.
Sorry. Mr. Manishankar, I referred to this. I'm going to wind up right here. Now, when we're talking of Calcutta Club, one of the most important things about Calcutta Club that I remember from my childhood used to be the Christmas lunch. And while everyone wore their Santa hats inside, including, I'm sure, Mr. Das Gupta, and enjoyed his turkey and Christmas pudding, you had lots of people going outside and saying, "Oi dekchi shota hocche Calcutta Club. Shekhane elitera boshe Santa tupi pore tara bideshi khabar khaye." But you know what? Even today in Bengal, that same thing has been replicated in Park Street. No one's tried to ruin it, what was happening in Calcutta Club. That's the difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. We have tried to replicate this somewhere else rather than coming in and saying, let's destroy this once and for all. So that's the classic difference between there. Hindutva is there because we as Hinduism allow it to, not the other way around. Thank you so much.